Okay, I think we'll make a start. Hello, everybody. I'm Electra, and I'm the founder and CEO of TLB. TLB is a legal design company, and we'll talk about what we do a little bit more later. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm joined by Rob, who is our new-ish head of delivery. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Electra. Still technically new, I guess. Hi, everyone. Some brief background on me. I joined TLB this year after spending the last 8 years or so as an in-house tech lawyer at RBS, Aviva and ITV, helping them with their digital transformation journeys. So I'm very familiar with the challenges faced by in-house legal teams and the need for effective resourcing. In my most recent role as head of legal for technology at ITV, I also developed a real interest in legal design, ops and tech. I realized there's a better way of doing things, that I wanted to specialize in this and that I wanted to help others. That led me here, and now I manage the team that delivers our services. Next slide, please.
It's been great to have you on board, Rob. Great. So who we are. So TLB, as I said, is a design-driven legal consultancy, and our mission is to make in-house lawyers' lives better. The way we do that is to maximize legal teams' impact through our strategic support and innovative ops solutions. And everything we do is always underpinned by design thinking methodology. So these are some of the companies that we work with. And over the last 5.5 years since we've come into existence, we have been working with lots of organizations, initially to take on more of their workload to help them alleviate some of their very heavy workload, but in parallel, looking at the way that they operate and helping them become much more efficient in the long run. I'd just like to touch upon what design thinking methodology is. So if we can go to the next slide. Sorry, before I do that, I'll talk about what we're going to do in today's session. So the first thing we'll look at is legal design and service delivery design. And everything we talk about today is about how to effectively resource your team. So this is a very strategic decision. Lots of in-house lawyers might go into a new role or join a new team or have already been in a team for a while, and they deliver the work that gets given to them without necessarily taking the time to think about how is the team resourced. Are we doing what we should be doing? Are we really being mindful of the stuff that we're doing and whether it should sit with us, or is it just because it's vaguely legal, it now sits with legal? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're also going to be talking about workload management strategy. So this is how you choose the things that you should be doing versus the things that you shouldn't necessarily be doing. We'll then talk about outsourcing, which is a very common way of managing heavy workload, when it's appropriate, when it's not. And then we'll briefly touch upon shared service centers, which is something that we've been hearing lots about. Lots of the people that we're talking with are considering shared service centers. So we just wanted to touch upon that. And then finally, insourcing, which is a bit of a confusing word, but it means how to use other teams within the business that are not legal to do some of the legal tasks. So that's the agenda for today. So design thinking. So earlier I talked about TLB and how everything we do is underpinned by design thinking. So this is a quote from Tim Brown, who is the executive chair of IDEO. If you don't know IDEO, it's an amazing organization. Check it out. They're synonymous with design thinking. So I'll let you read this quote. The most important bit for me is the bit at the end that says, thinking like a designer can transform the way organizations develop products, services, processes, and strategy. And this is so important for legal, because traditionally legal has been very focused on itself. It's been quite an esoteric industry where, you're a lawyer, you need to speak in a certain way, you carry the risk. It's kind of all about us. But if we were to flip that and look at who it is that we're serving, who's using our processes, who's using our documents, who's engaging with the products and tools that we create, we can build much more effective ways of working. And this applies to how you resource your team as well. Over to the next slide. Okay, I'll now hand over to Rob, who's going to talk to us about how design thinking can be applied to your legal function end to end.
Yeah, so over the last year or so in-house, I'd started to see legal design talked about a lot, but it seemed to focus on making contracts shorter, simpler, more pleasing on the eye. That's definitely part of it, but a very small part. And it's actually a lot bigger than that. It's the application of design thinking, which Electra's just talked about, to law. It's about looking at the entire legal function and how it operates holistically, and then redesigning it with the users in mind. So legal can often seem very complex and scary. Therefore, people feel they need to have everything blessed by legal, which creates an even bigger workload. Or the opposite, they think legal is a blocker or a bottleneck, and then they disengage or exclude legal, which obviously creates significant risk. So it needn't be that way, of course. Focusing on what the users of legal systems, processes, and documents want and need is incredibly important. By making such things more user-centric, you reduce complexity, friction, and pain points. This, of course, increases stakeholder engagement, which in turn reduces risk, maximizes deal speed, and generates real value for the business. So applying legal design to the end-to-end operating model of a legal function essentially means looking at these core areas here: strategy, services, people, process, and technology. Asking yourself some key questions and then designing solutions for those questions, again, always thinking about the user. So, for example, for strategy, consider what your CEO or CFO cares about and how does legal execute on this. For services, what is legal responsible for and what should it be focusing on? For people, what should the roles and responsibilities be within and outside of legal? For process, what process and documents are used and how can these be optimized? And then finally, for technology, what is the existing tech stack and what legal tech could be implemented to support with the services and processes? Next slide, please. Over to you, Electra.
Thanks. Okay, so how do we apply that to the way we resource our team? So effective resourcing straddles these two areas, services and people. So as Rob said earlier, when you're designing your legal function and you're thinking about how do I optimize the way this team works, if you think about these 5 pillars, but if you focus specifically on the services and the people, these two areas are really important, and that's why they're second and third. So once you know where the business is going and therefore where legal should be going, the next thing is to figure out what you're doing and whether you should be doing it. And as I said earlier, the reality is that many in-house teams are just so busy, they get on with whatever work is thrown at them. And then when something becomes problematic, they get a law firm involved. And that's a really common pattern we're seeing. And it's almost like when it feels urgent, you will spend lots of money on a law firm. And in some instances, that's perfectly legitimate. But sometimes the problems that arise wouldn't necessarily have arisen had you considered the way that you operate and who's doing what before that occurred. So it's more cost efficient and it's less stressful if you design your services the way you're going to be delivering those services in time. So as with anything, our view is that to resource the delivery of your services as an in-house legal team as effectively as possible, you should be taking a design thinking approach from the bottom up. So if we move on to the next slide, this is kind of what I mean. So if the middle bit is legal, by taking that design thinking approach, you're really thinking about the users. So what do my stakeholders need from legal and what's our team's purpose? So this is when you're thinking about what you should be doing. What do the people in our team actually do? What should our team be doing in order to meet stakeholder needs? And what should they not be doing to have the time and space to meet stakeholder needs? Because at the end of the day, deciding not to do something is a very strategic decision that needs to be considered. And often when you come from a legal background, you've got this idea ingrained in you that you should be doing whatever's given to you. But actually, being really smart about what you do and saying no is as important as delivering the work. And in each case, how do we empower and motivate everyone to do what's needed for us to achieve our objectives? That includes other people in the organization as well, at which point you think about how you can empower people to take ownership of the stuff that you're asking them to do to enable legal to meet stakeholder needs whilst also managing risk appropriately. Next slide.
So taking that a step further, it brings us on to workload management strategy. So it's really important to identify all the different work that's currently being done by legal and anything that's remotely legal. Then maybe all sorts of things that legal could do, but it wouldn't be possible for them to do them all or do them all well as be a strategic business partner. So once you've identified the work, It's about making a strategic decision to manage the work in a certain way by plotting it against this grid. So starting with high volume, low risk. While these things are very important, they don't necessarily require specialist business knowledge, and the lawyers in the team needn't necessarily be doing them. They could be outsourced to a legal company or given to a shared service center abroad. So for example, we're talking about vendor contracts, trademark registrations, and legal ops, where you don't have an in-house legal ops function. And rather than the traditional, more narrow approach to legal ops that focuses on billing and external spend management, we're talking about things like process design, tool optimization, template refinement, tech selection, tech implementation here when we're talking about legal ops. Then on to low volume, low risk. These are the things that could be dealt with by other departments like customer services and marketing, if given the right know-how, policies, playbooks, and training. Low volume, high risk. These are the things that are infrequent, but require extensive legal expertise and capacity. So it's advisable to use a law firm from a risk and capacity perspective, and it doesn't make sense to train team members up to deal with such things, given how often they crop up. And then finally, high volume, high risk. These are the things that come up a lot, add competitive advantage, require specialist business knowledge, and if done badly, will be harmful to the business. So the legal team should really be built and developed to deal with such things. This is the build competency within your legal team. So again, just to reiterate the key message here, is do the really strategic work that adds value and requires specialist business knowledge. Don't do everything just because it's vaguely legal and that's the way it's always been done. For the rest of the talk today, we're going to focus on everything on the left-hand side, as they're the less familiar ways of resourcing. Next slide, please. So just starting with outsourcing to a legal company, you may be questioning why outsource versus recruiting more junior employees, but there are a number of things to consider here. So management, you don't want a significant management overhead training junior team members to deal with lower risk work. Accountability, you do need to remain accountable for certain work, but that doesn't necessarily mean the actual doing of the work. Others could be responsible for that. Recruitment and retention, it's really hard to find and keep employees who are doing mostly repetitive, often less challenging work, so avoid giving them this work. Capability to deal with this sort of lower risk work, as we've called it, requires setting up and building out the capability internally. You don't want to be using your valuable resources for this. You should instead spend those resources on building other more strategic capabilities. Distraction. The fact is, if you're doing lower risk work, it naturally means less time available to do the work that really delivers on business strategy. And then the other benefits of outsourcing to a legal company are the work is usually managed by a team rather than an individual. There are multidisciplinary SMEs, they're accountable as a supplier, and they can provide really valuable data, including at an industry level, as well as optimization insights that allow you to continue to improve things over time. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so to Rob's point, it's a really strategic decision to go, I'm not going to do this stuff because I've got other more strategic stuff to be doing. And actually, when I'm building out my legal team, I'm building out that capability as a legal team, and I need to the top right-hand corner, building competency, I can only focus on one thing. And I can really relate to that, even though I haven't been general counsel or been in that position before, because as someone who's built a business, it's really easy to just constantly be distracted by other things. And the more you focus on what you're doing, the better you can do it. So having that focus and eliminating distraction and just spending your time becoming really, really good at a targeted deliverable or targeted product, if you like, that's the way to go really fast and to be very effective. So that's one of the reasons you might want to outsource. If you're a larger organization, or if you're in an organization where you're in a position to use a shared services center, then that might be a way forward as well for those lower risk, high volume pieces of work. So what's a shared services center? So a shared services center is not new. It's been around since the mid 80s as a concept, but in legal, it is a fairly nascent area. So I know that there are a lot of businesses that have been working with their shared services centers that have existed for other things like IT or more administrative tasks based usually in offshore jurisdictions, but for legal, it is still quite nascent. And it's different to having a head office where all the work's effectively controlled centrally. Instead, a shared services centre operates as an internal customer service business. So it's like a business on its own, and you're their customer, and they will deliver stuff to you through SLAs, and those are used as contractual documents basically. And you have your SLAs there, and they charge you for the work that you're doing. And that might be the construct that you already have within your larger organization to deal with other types of work that you could then adopt for your legal team with some tweaks. So yes, so you will behave like a customer to them, and with shared service centres, employees still perform the jobs that they're performing, and then the systems are fully integrated with the business unit systems and processes. So they're not an outsourced service provider. You share the same environments, you're using the same tools. You're not necessarily part of the same team because you are their client effectively, but ultimately you are integrated, and that's a really massive value add because there's really big cost savings there, and also you can spend time investing in those people and training them up and tweaking your processes to ensure that they're delivering to the highest quality possible. So yeah, that's different from outsourcing, where the outsourced provider is fully accountable as a supplier, but there is that split accountability there because you're still behaving as their client. The benefits aren't just cost saving, it also allows legal to focus on more strategic initiatives, and it alleviates the team from those low risk, high volume pieces of work. And it also stops you from having to do the day-to-day management of a big team. You will have a person on the other side that you will liaise with, and that's your point of contact, or a small team, but you don't have that massive overhead of managing a bigger team. So it's a really good route if the types of work that you want to pass on to the shared services centre are appropriate, and you have things in place like playbooks, processes, governance, and you're really clear in how you want to design this. Okay. Next step. So insourcing. So insourcing is another way of resourcing your team. Insourcing is effectively finding other teams within the business that you can make accountable for some of the work that is traditionally considered legal, but isn't necessarily. And I always use a DSAR as a good example. So DSAR's data subject access requests can cause huge volumes of work for teams of all sizes, for businesses of all sizes, depending on the nature of your product or service. So the people that are on the front line are customer services. And I'm thinking of a tech company, for example. You have customer services and they're always liaising with their customers, and DSARs come through to them. We've seen models where the customer services team will pass on those requests to legal, and they'll deal with them. And a lot of the stuff that you need to do to satisfy DSAR is administrative, such as collecting data from across the business, collating it into a file and sending it over, and sending a response to the data subject. This is something that you could really easily hand over to your customer services team with a robust playbook. The playbooks that we've designed in the past, for example, that you could be using are they're very prescriptive, but they're also very granular. So they'll say, if you get this type of request, this is what it means. There is an obligation on us to do this by law. So you explain that in plain English. This is what you would say. There's a canned response that they can literally copy and paste, or use tools to create automated responses. And then on the back of that, if anything happens and you need to escalate, this is the route to escalation. So in this instance, you would escalate to IT, or you would escalate to legal, or you would escalate to the DPO directly. So spending the time and front loading the effort to build playbooks like that, to hand over enormous chunks of work to other parts of the business, can really alleviate legal without necessarily increasing the cost to legal's budget. Obviously, there's an increased, or there's a dissemination of the cost to the business, but again, it's lower cost because you're not using really expensive legal resources. So that's an example of insourcing and what you could do to make sure that you're handing it over with the right parameters to make sure that you're minimizing risk. Other things that you could do are create knowledge hubs. So again, you get lots of questions as a legal team. How do you eliminate those? some people have a Slack channel or a Teams channel for legal, and there are lawyers that will literally just sit there and answer questions for a good chunk of the day. The problem with that is that all the answers that you're giving are just being lost in the ether. You're not really building up your knowledge. You're sharing your knowledge, but you're not building it up, and it's not being reused. You're not scaling yourself. So if you were to build a knowledge hub, then you could, again, front load the effort to make yourself more scalable, to make your business, your legal team more scalable, so that business can scale with it. Other things to consider are user-friendly policies and processes. Again, often when you read a legal policy, eyes glaze over, not that interesting, not that engaging, not really speaking to the audience. If you're speaking to a load of salespeople, they're really busy, they don't want to have to read enormous policies. And also think of their generation. They're used to reading stuff that looks slightly more engaging and more designy. So if you put something like that in front of them, you have a better chance of ensuring that they know their obligations, or they're reading the processes that you want them to follow, so that you can, again, alleviate your team from heavy workloads. Training, same thing, and then self-help. So things like NDAs. I hope you're all adopters of one NDA, but if you're not, your NDAs or whatever it is that you're using, you could very quickly and easily automate that so people can just self-serve. And there are lots of things that you can create self-serve desks with, including a legal front door, which we're not going to talk about today, but there are so many ways for you to engage the business more so that you can alleviate the workload. It's just a matter of being strategic about it, thinking about the things that you do and don't do, and then how you get other people to help you with delivering your services. And this is a quick demo of a knowledge hub that we built for us at TLB. Thought we might be inspiring. So this is how we perform our red flag reviews when we review contracts for clients. So it's just an example of what it might look like. Okay, so what we do at TLB, since I went on maternity leave and have now returned, we've had an opportunity to really think about how we message our services, because as a five and a half year old business, we've grown quite organically, and we've been doing things that didn't really have a name, but we knew had value. So I wanted to use this opportunity to recap on what we do as a business. So as I said earlier, everything we do is underpinned by legal design methodology. Everything we do is very user-centric. And there are 4 pillars to our business. The first is legal as a service. And what we do is we offer legal ops as a service. We act as an extension to your legal team, and we can work in our capacity as legal operations consultants. We can do the end-to-end piece for you here. So the discovery bit, strategy bit, and then the delivery and execution. We also offer contracts as a service, where again, we act as an extension to your legal team, and we can review your contracts for you where those are low risk, high volume. And we also do the same for data protection, where we act as an extension of your team, and we do everything other than be your DPO. So we can do the whole piece end to end, including an evaluation to see whether there's anything that you still need to comply with. The second limb is strategic workshops. So this is the kickoff point for almost all our projects. So we could start off with a legal ops discovery workshop, and here what we do is we do a discovery piece to understand how your legal operations are currently, and the areas that you need to focus on. Again, we'd look at the 5 pillars that we showed earlier in the slide and see how you benchmark within your industry, but also more broadly. And then we'd give you a list of priorities and say, this is what we think you should be doing. It's all actionable, so you don't need to work with us thereafter, but it's a really good starting point for you. The other thing we do is problem definition workshops. So lots of legal teams will come to us and they'll say, we know that there's friction in this area, we know that there's a problem, but we're not quite sure what that is and how to go about it. Here, you would really benefit from a problem definition workshop where we follow design thinking methodology to really get to the crux of what it is that you're trying to solve and why you're feeling the pain. And this is often overlooked in larger projects, but it's so important to know what it is that you're trying to find a solution for, and making sure predominantly that everyone's on the same page. And then finally, strategy definition workshop. So if you want to figure out how your legal team should operate across the board, and you don't just want to focus on the operations side, but generally, what should the strategy look like? What should the legal strategy look like in order for it to ensure that it's delivering on the wider business strategy? We can help with that piece as well. We also offer optimization projects. So again, these are smaller projects on standalone pieces like a legal front door. We can build that on your tech stack. You don't need to go and buy tech. I can guarantee that probably all organizations have existing tools that you are paying for that we could use to build a legal front door on. And again, process tool optimization. This is any process from product to internal processes. We redesign documents, make them beautiful, but also easier to understand, negotiate, and engage. Negotiation playbooks to empower more junior people in the business, in the legal team, to pick up more complex negotiations for when you're building your competency. And then finally, style guides and training. So who is legal? What's your tone of voice? How do you want to train your team, but also the rest of the business? Because building your personal brand is actually really important for the way that you partner and your relationship with the broader organization. And finally, we do large transformation projects. So these are longer projects where we would look at your end-to-end legal function and redesign it. We take your templates or your suite of templates. We've just delivered quite a few of these projects recently, full template standardization and design end-to-end. We also look at the way that your contracts are used within your organization. Where do they sit? Who triggers that? Who starts the contract? Where does it live? Is it automated? So the end-to-end process, but also template redesign. We do the whole piece. And then finally, tech selection and implementation. We know that the tech landscape at the moment is quite saturated. There are a lot of tech tools out there. It's really difficult to choose the right one for you. We strongly suggest that you don't just go and buy tech, because again, recently we just brought on quite a few projects where people have bought the tech but can't start using it because they aren't ready. So if you're thinking about tech, please let us know and we can absolutely help. So that was a whistle-stop tour of what we do as a business. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A below. I already see a couple of questions here that I'll go ahead and answer. But if you have any questions in the meantime, having seen that, please ask them in the Q&A below. Someone's asking if we can get a copy of these slides. Yes, we're going to send a recording of this webinar to everybody. If you'd like a copy of these slides, please contact us directly and we'll share what we can with you. The next question is, could you give an example of when this legal design strategy has worked in practice, please? Yes, so a legal design strategy is effectively your target operating model. So it's not a novice concept to have a target operating model, to say, this is how I think my legal team needs to work. So an example is a tech company that we worked with. It was a fintech, and the GC had just gone in and they wanted to really take a considered approach to their new role by really thinking about what it is that they did and what they should be doing, and using the opportunity to train people as to how they would engage with his team. So we started off by doing a discovery piece and talk to their stakeholders and to understand what it is that they needed from legal. And then as he built his team, we also spoke to the people that he was working with to understand what they were doing day to day, and also to him to understand, what you do. Do you just review contracts all day? Are you pulled into board meetings? What's the stuff that you do? And then a combination of those two is basically your starting point to do your workload management strategy piece, to say, this is the stuff I should be doing, this is the stuff I shouldn't be doing. The stuff I shouldn't be doing, someone's got to do it. Who's going to do it? And how do I make sure that when I give it to them, I give it to them in such a way to ensure that I'm not massively increasing the risk profile of my business, but also that I can maintain some level of control, but don't necessarily have all the management. And then after that, we would see which processes need to be redesigned. So for example, playbooks, or the way that the business engages with legal, that's how we would do it. So that's an example of how a legal design strategy has worked in practice. Okay. Any more questions? Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. We will circulate the recording of this after the webinar. And if you have any other questions or want to have a chat, please let us know directly. And thanks for joining.
Thanks very much.